Killer Innovations Podcast for Sunday, January 1st, 2006, show number 41. Coming to you from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. Well, we're just coming off the holidays. It is the first show of 2006. Please keep in mind that the album name for the podcast will therefore change. If you may recall, the album name for this podcast, as you download it, will come across as Killer Innovations 2006. And it will restart with track number 1. This just tries to help to make sure that all the podcasts show up on your MP3 player in the correct order. So just giving everybody a heads up that the name of the album will change here for January 1st. Apologize for the skipping of the show last weekend with the holidays. It just got a little too crazy with all my kids home from college. We ended up with about 25 people in the house for the Christmas day, so things got a little crazy, so I was not able to get a show out. So we'll get the show out today and then get back onto the weekly schedule as we go into 2006. It is show 41. We're 9 shows away from show 50. I'm trying to plan something special for show number 50. So I'm open to ideas. I'm also looking for audio feedback from as many listeners as possible to play back during show number 50. So people who've been listening to the show for quite some time, want to share their thoughts on innovation and creativity. Here's your chance. So I'm kind of looking to use show 50 as kind of more of a listener show than me doing a prepared show. So your thoughts, comments, feedbacks, thoughts on the show, whatever comes to mind. So I'm going to start collecting up all comments, audio comments, and we'll collect those up and play those back as part of show number 50. Let's see. Thanks for the emails. Got a lot of emails from people over the holidays here, a lot of holiday wishes. I really do appreciate that. Please keep the feedback coming. You can send them to me by email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can also call the voicemail feedback line at 703-636-4460. That is in the U.S., so it's +1 703-636-4460, or you can always Skype me at Phil_McKinney. I know a number of you have tried to Skype me over the holiday break. I've left all my computers up, but have not been spending a lot of time in my office here at my house. So I see a lot of you who've tried to contact it or tried to Skype me during the holiday break, but I was not physically sitting at the computer, so I apologize for that. But don't hesitate to go ahead and Skype me if you see my Skype indicator that I'm up and available. Okay? It is a new month. It is also the first of the year. So voting has restarted on Podcast Alley. So remember, go out to Podcast Alley and vote for your favorite podcasts. It's the easiest way for you to say thanks for the work that all the producers of the podcast put in. Okay, this week's show, segment number 1, I want to talk about what I call outcome-driven innovation. Now, this is actually driven by a book. I've referenced the book previously in a show. I don't know if it was last week's or not, 2 weeks ago or maybe 3 weeks ago. But I picked up a new book by Anthony Ulrich called What Customers Want, Using Outcome-Driven Innovation to Create Breakthrough Products and Services. Now, I'm about 75% through the book. And at first, I was a little skeptical on the approach that Anthony was putting forward in the book. But as I got more into it, and got a better understanding of what it is he was trying to describe, it makes a lot of sense. So rather than just telling you go buy the book and read it, I'm going to summarize here a little bit about what Anthony is doing and what he's proposing as far as how to make your plans on what you're going to innovate on have a higher success rate from the standpoint of targeting those innovations to areas that your customers actually need. So this is, how do you find out what your customers want, and then how do you focus that innovation in that area? So I'm going to give you at least a little bit of a summary, and I'm also going to tie it back into what basically has been the theme of the Killer Innovations podcast from day one is then how do you better structure the questions so that you can find better ideas and therefore, killer innovations around solving what it is your customers want. So the basic precept for what Anthony is talking about in his book is really about the challenge we have in defining what it is we're going to build for a new product or a new service. Typically we go out, we try to put together some kind of a description of the product. We try to put together some kind of a needs document or a feature function grid or some other document that then describes to, potentially the developers, to management, to your investors, what it is you want to go build. And what Anthony says is rather than trying to put together these documents that tend to be fairly vague on features, functions, benefits, those kinds of terms, step back and look at your customers and ask the question of what jobs is it that they're trying to achieve, and then how do they measure success that that job has actually been done correctly. So take for example, you're going to come up with a new concept for a TV in the living room. Or let's say not a TV, let's say a PVR, kind of a TiVo-like device. You're going to come up with a new kind of TiVo device in the living room. What are the jobs that a typical consumer does around the recording and playback and the enjoyment of content? They want something that's easy to use. They want something that has lots of storage. It has a low failure rate, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what Anthony puts forward is a very structured way to define what those jobs are. And he recommends that you could, he suggests that you could describe 50 to 150 jobs around any kind of an area. So if you're going to say, I want to talk about what are the jobs in a living room where you can record and play back content, what are the 50 to 150, quote, jobs that a family will do in order to record and play back content. And he always starts the jobs by either using the word maximize, so I want to maximize the capacity for the content that I store. Or you want to target minimize. I want to minimize the time it takes for me to set up and define a program that I want recorded. And by using the terms maximize and minimize, you're giving very specific targets. I want to have maximum storage. I'm not saying that that's going to be 20 gig, 50 gig, 500 gigabytes of storage. Minimize doesn't mean it has to be less than 2 seconds, but it gives you the target such that once you've categorized all of these jobs, I'm trying to fight this cold here, that by defining this maximum or minimum, then you can at least convey to both the user and to the developers of the technology kind of where the target is heading. So once you've identified these 50 to 150 jobs around a particular area of innovation, you then go back to your user community. Now, albeit I'm not a big fan for focus groups or asking the users, but by defining the job, you're asking the customer really two fundamental questions. Tell me how important this job is in your satisfaction. How important is this job for you? So Is it maximum storage, or is it minimizing the setup time? And each one gets scored on a sheet from 1 to 5. 1 being not important at all, 5 being extremely important. Then you come back and you tell them, okay, how is that satisfied with your current products or services that you have available? So if you say that maximum storage is very important, it's a 5, and your current storage or your current device has very high storage, and so therefore it's a 5, you therefore then understand that, hey, it's very important, yet it's currently satisfied fairly well by what's available in the product. Now, the key here is looking at the difference between how important it is and how well it's served by current products or technologies available today. So if I have something that is very low on importance, but it's very high on the satisfaction, then that's something that would be called overserved. I've got more features, more functions, more capacity than what the user. So it's not really all that important, and my current device is, very well satisfies it. So in that case, it is overserved. Now, typically, you would think that that's not an area for innovation. Now, Anthony in the book says, no, that's not the case. That actually gives you an opportunity to come up with an alternative technology to significantly reduce the cost. Go after that in an approach that allows you to significantly reduce the cost, and therefore you can innovate on going into markets that are overserved, which means typically they're also overpriced. Now, the flip side is that if I have a very high importance and I have a very low satisfaction, that is an area that is underserved. And if it's underserved, then that's an area where you should be focusing the innovation. So in the case of where you find items that are overserved or significantly underserved, then the approach could be taking the Killer Innovations approach, create a set of questions that allow you to create the best ideas around that particular area of innovation. So if you, for instance, said that, take this PVR concept that we were talking about earlier, and you said that minimize the time it took you to set up a show for recording. Very important, but it's very low, meaning it's very underserved. So therefore then, focusing on a series of innovations to really address the user interface, all of the ability to set up and define programs, and you just focused all of your idea generation and all of the killer questions that you would propose to focus in on that one area, because you've already defined an area that is very important and is not very well satisfied in the market today, and that becomes really a key opportunity. Now, what I found when I went through this book, and again, I'm only about 75% through, but I've turned into a big fan for this book, is to use this as kind of an upfront process where we talk about focus. Now, in some of the earlier podcasts, I talked about areas of potential innovation and how do you look into those areas, such as new geographies, new customer segments, new entire market areas, those kinds of things. And what this process, this using outcome-driven innovation process, allows you to create a much more refined area of focus. So rather than just saying, hey, I want to focus on a new geography, are there jobs or functions or areas that are underserved in the geography that you could therefore much more narrowly focus your idea generation to potentially create that breakthrough or killer opportunity for you? So again, the title of the book is What Customers Want, Using Outcome-Driven Innovations to Create Breakthrough Products and Services. The author is Anthony Ulrich, and it's put out by McGraw-Hill. It's only been out maybe for about a month or a month and a half so far. Like I said, I'm 3/4 through. It's been my reading through the holiday season here. And I'm telling you, it is a great, great book. I would strongly encourage you in going out and picking it up and taking a read through it. But again, just to quickly summarize, the premise that Anthony puts forward is you don't look for feature functions or benefits. You define jobs. Once you've defined a job meaning that the objective is either to maximize or minimize some capability or task, then define from the user whether that's important, then define from the user how well it's satisfied currently in the marketplace, and then the third, by looking at the difference between those two, find things that are significantly underserved or significantly overserved, and that becomes the target area for you, for your innovations, and coming up with new products or services. Moving on to segment 2, what I'm going to talk about is an area that, given that it's the first of the year, and a lot of you who are potentially in areas of research and development or working in organizations where you're trying to drive the thinking about innovation, the number one question that comes up, particularly around the first of the year, is what should be the budget for R&D investment for a company to be successful? Is that R&D investment tied to as a percentage of revenue, percentage of profit? What is the right metric, and what should be the target metric? Now, it's interesting because there's a lot of discussion that's been going on for a number of years and a number of research reports that have been developed to look at what is the right number, and is there some correlation between the amount of dollars that a company spends on R&D or innovation and the result or impact that it has to the organization as a whole. Now, it's interesting that in this case, Booz Allen Hamilton did a correlation around basically R&D to sales. So, what percentage of R&D to sales, and does it have any correlation to sales growth? Now, the general thinking is that if I increase R&D to sales, so it's whether it's 3%, 3.5%, 4%, up to 12, 15, 18%, which in some cases, that could be, for instance, particularly with software companies where you see a much higher R&D spend to sales. You would anticipate that as you increase the percentage of R&D, that there would be some kind of impact to sales growth as percentage from year to year. Well, in the Booz Allen Hamilton study, what you find is that there is absolutely no correlation. So there's companies that have, for instance, 1% R&D spend to sales, and they have 120% sales growth. At the same time, you have a whole bunch of companies that are in the exact same that have negative sales growth. Likewise, you have companies that are in 6, 8, 10% R&D to sales investment, and they're at like 0 sales growth. So the interesting point here is that R&D investment by itself has no correlation or direct correlation to the impact to the business. Now, what does this really mean? Well, one is that investment dollars by themselves are not going to be the thing that's going to drive success for the business. It's not just about the R&D dollars. It's what is the process to take those R&D dollars and actually make investments, make the right decisions. Which innovation should you invest in? And more importantly, what innovation projects do you have underway that should be stopped, that should be killed? Now, that's probably some of the hardest problems that companies have to go through today is you've maybe have 2 or 3 years of investment into an area, but you're just not going to get the return. So at what point do you just say, that's it, we're going to kill it, we're going to free up those dollars of resources, and we're going to put them into a better opportunity for the business? So what the studies and what all the research is saying is that just looking at R&D dollars as a percentage of sales has no correlation to the success of the R&D or innovation programs within the business. It's not about dollars themselves. it's also about the process. However, in the Booz Allen study, there was one correlation that was identified, and that correlation is the impact of R&D spending on the median gross margin. So it was the only comparison when you looked at pure financial numbers that said that if I was below the median R&D to sales investment for my industry, then my gross margin was going to be less than companies that were above the median R&D investment for my industry segment. So the only correlation was from the standpoint of looking at R&D investment was purely in the area of margin. So for instance, and some of the biggest gaps were things like computer and electronics. So if I was below the median R&D spend for computers and electronics, I averaged out at about a 28% gross margin. However, if I was above the median R&D spend, my gross margin was 46%. Now, some of the narrowest gaps were areas such as telecom. So the difference was 45 to 49%. But things like healthcare went from 58% to 79% gross margin. Or aerospace and defense. If you underspent on R&D, you had on average about an 18% gross margin, versus if you overspent, you were at 36% gross margin. I mean, the concept here is gross margin is really more of an indicator of a better mousetraps, meaning better product differentiation, potentially lower manufacturing costs, whatever. And so when you look at margin, you're really saying is what is the impact of innovation on delivering me something that's unique and differentiated to the marketplace that I can therefore charge a higher margin. Now the sad part about that is that doesn't directly automatically correlate to an increase in sales growth. Keep in mind, because early innovations typically are still a small percentage of your total revenue, and it takes time for them to become a significant portion, particularly the larger the corporation you are. So part of the challenge, I think, with any of these studies, such as Booz Allen, is they may not look far enough back history-wise in order to really make that information meaningful. But again, the typical question that I always get is what can I go tell management at my organization should be the percentage of revenue or percentage of sales or percentage of whatever the metric that you use for your industry, what should be our dollar allocation to R&D in order to for us to be successful. And I guess the message that I want you to go away with is that dollars by themselves do not guarantee success. You need to have an R&D innovation process that wraps around those dollars of investments to make sure that you have a meaningful and effective innovation pipeline that is going to generate success for your business. Okay, let's move on to segment number 3, the killer question of the week. And the killer question of the week, we're going to correlate it back to the segment 1 topic, which was the outcome-driven innovation. And so this week's killer question is, what jobs are people trying to get done but can't with current technologies and services? What jobs are people trying to get done but can't with current technologies and services? Now this seems like a very obvious question, but think about it in context of the outcome-driven innovation process that we talked about in segment 1. When we talk about jobs can be tasks, but it really is in the minds of the user what is the end objective. What is it that they're trying to achieve at the end? Because keep in mind that users are not a good source of ideas for new products. They're not going to come to you and say, if you built this widget and it's 3 inches by 2 inches and it has, this spec list, there's going to be a huge market for it. Because the users are not familiar with what's possible. users are familiar with the jobs and tasks that they're trying to get done, or burdens that they have upon themselves that could be taken off of them should technology be applied effectively. So again, what jobs are people trying to get done but can't with current technologies and services? So for instance, one would be, in my case, I want to minimize the time spent paying bills. I have to pay the bills, but for me to be really, really happy, I want to absolutely minimize it. You should get it to zero where I don't see a bill. They're just magically paid and they're magically correct. I'd be the happy guy, and I'd be signing up for services. And I'd do the pay online and those kinds of things. But it's just a burden to try to manage and track it. So the one task, me personally, would be minimize time spent paying bills. Another task for me is I want to maximize the time spent with my family. Now, because of my job and my travel and the other things that I've got going on, that becomes a real challenge. So when I am home, I don't want to be with a bunch of things on my plate. I want to maximize the time spent with my family. Third, here's a perfect example, and some of you may or may not agree with this, depending on career and what it is you see as kind of your objective, and maybe one of yours is to maximize income. Now that's kind of a broad one, and these are really, really rough examples I'm just trying to use as representative, but maybe maximize income, or minimize the amount paid in taxes, or minimize the time it takes to make dinner, or maximize the enjoyment you get from your personal photos, or minimize the time it takes to cut your grass. Whatever the tasks are, or jobs that people are trying to achieve, there may be opportunities for technologies and service to be applied to that to help achieve that. So again, this week's killer question is, what jobs are people trying to get done but can't with current technologies and services? And with that, let's wrap it up. However, before we go, I've sat down, this is the first of the year, so I've actually have put together what I'm calling, I don't really call it my New Year's resolutions, and also kind of things that I'm thankful for. And I want to share those with you as the listeners because of how much enjoyment that I am getting out of producing this podcast, the interactions that I have with you, the feedback when you send me emails or talk with me on Skype, or those of you that I've had the opportunity to meet face-to-face for dinners and lunches and coffees all over the world. So things that I'm really personally thankful for, obviously, of my families and friends, but I'm really thankful for you, the listeners. And the feedback that you're giving me, and what the impact that the podcast is having on people, in their daily lives, means a lot to me. It really started as an experiment a year ago, March. It really has expanded my sphere of friends, and the encouragement that I get from all of you as the listeners, via email, Skype calls, phone calls, meetings, lunches, dinners, that I've had with a number of you. I really do appreciate this. I really do appreciate your encouragement around the podcast, and so I just want to say, thank you for that. Now, for my New Year's resolutions, and all of this is wrapped around the podcast and around innovation. So here are my 3 New Year's resolutions that I'm sharing with you, so therefore everybody can keep me honest on this, okay? So, my first New Year's resolution is I want to set aside 2 to 3 times per week to hold kind of a private 30-minute idea session so that I can begin, or I can keep up the idea generation, one around the podcast, but also to continue to keep my skills up to speed. Given my day-to-day job and also the work on the podcast, I've kind of gotten out of my own habit of, keeping the idea process or the creativity processes going for myself. So I want to set aside 30 minutes each 2 to 3 times per week where I'm just driving idea generation around a whole wide range of areas that I'm personally interested in. Secondly is I want to complete reading all the books that I've started. Now I've got this nasty habit of getting maybe 2/3 through a book and then putting it down and never going back to it. So I probably here in my office, I don't know, I'm counting here 13, 14, 15, 16 books that I'm probably 3/4 through but never quite finish. So one of my New Year's resolutions is to actually finish these books and not leave them hanging. All of these books, however, have something to do with innovation or creativity. My wife has now, just resigned herself that if there's a new book on innovation or a new book on creativity that's come out that it's an automatic buy. And the third is I want to complete the redesign of the website. Now, the website that you're visiting at killerinnovations.com has actually had the same artwork. I am ashamed to say this, but it actually has the exact same setup from my personal blog, which was launched in 2000. So there's been no changes, no updates, no rework of the artwork, nothing since that time. So my other objective is to actually sit down, working with some people, and just try to get the redesign done. So those are my 3 New Year's resolutions. And again, and it's a tradition in our family that we sit back around the first of the year and just think back over the year and think back across things that we're thankful for. And I do have to say I am extremely thankful for the podcast and for the enablement or the attachment that it's created between myself and you, the listener, and the feedback that you've given me and the encouragement that you've given me around the podcast. It's a great venue for me just to be able to share with you, but also that it's the interactive portion of it that I find most beneficial back. So again, thank you for that. So let me wrap up here, reminding you, yes, it is the first of the month, so don't forget to vote, Podcast Alley. You can go to killerinnovations.com and click on the Podcast Alley button, and it'll take you directly over there. Remember, voting on Podcast Alley is the easiest way to say thanks to your favorite podcast. And again, remember, first of the month, all of your votes for previous months have been wiped out, and voting restarts. Keep the feedback coming. You can email me at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can call the feedback line at +1 703 636 4460, or you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. Join in on the conversations at the KI community site. So again, you can go to killerinnovations.com, click on the KI community button, and it will take you there. We have Chris Woodruff now, who is doing some moderating on the site. If any of the rest of you listeners who are active on that site want to pick up one of the subject areas and take over as the moderator, it would be a big help to me, just given the time pressures, given that I'm still doing 2 jobs, since they still have not backfilled me in my previous role. Also, please tell others about the podcast. We've kind of leveled off on the total number of subscribers on the podcast. I think there's a lot more opportunities to share the information that's in this podcast with others. So feel free to put links up onto your sites. Share your experiences of what you've learned from the podcast. I do go out and track and look at what listeners do write about the podcast on their own websites, etc. So I would encourage you to pay it forward, pass it on. Let's see. Hopefully, now that we're after the first of the year and the holidays are behind us, things will settle down and I'll be back on a regular podcast schedule. I will be at the Consumer Electronics Show this week in Las Vegas. I fly out Wednesday, and I will be in Las Vegas for CES. So if any listeners are going to be in Las Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show, please drop me an email, and we'll set up a time to meet in Las Vegas. Again, I apologize. I probably should have given everybody a little bit more advanced notice, but hopefully you're listening to this on the airplane on the way to Las Vegas, and we can set up a time to meet. After that, I will be in California for about a week or so. So we can also, if you happen to be in the San Francisco Bay Area, we can also set up a time, hopefully in the schedule, to touch base then. Okay? With that, we'll talk to you next week. Have a happy new year. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all the support that you've given us in 2005, and hopefully we'll be able to continue moving the podcast forward in 2006 and continue to create, hopefully, what is great content that can be shared with all of you as listeners. So again, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.